Hello, welcome back to Tony Talks Money, the show to help you grow your finances. I've got over 30 years experience as both a financial planner and in latter years as a fund manager. So I've got lots of experience of how to grow wealth, how to become financially free, create those multiple sources of passive income, minimize your taxes, and give you the opportunity to just work when you feel like it rather than because you feel you have to. So the financial independence is a big thing about this show. Now, we've just had a budget by the Labour Party just last week, and there was real forebodings about this budget beforehand because Keir Starmer had described it as being a painful budget. So we were all fearing the worst, and some of the rumours about what could happen, fortunately, didn't all materialise. I still think it was not really a budget for growth. That's what it was described as. It was purely tax-raising budget, and I don't really feel that it's going to help the economy grow at all, personally. But nonetheless, let's go through some of the main changes, and what I'll then go on to explain is what kind of planning you might want to do to minimise any potential tax increases as a result of the budget. Because even though it was, in my opinion, bad news, because tax increases I don't think are good for society, I think it's far better to have a country where you have lower taxes and smaller government, because all the success stories of countries in the world are ones where you got that kind of environment, more libertarian. And I just think for the sake of creating greater wealth for all of us, it's better to have lower taxes and smaller government. Now, I know that might not sound popular to some people out there watching this video, but I think the evidence is before your eyes. If you look at these great countries that have succeeded with this kind of approach, then it talks for itself. So if you think of countries like Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong, went before the Chinese took over. These are great success stories of this kind of strategy. You know, America was very libertarian for over 100 years after the American War of Independence, when they got rid of Great Britain that was taxing them too heavily. So that's my basic belief. Now let's get on to what actually happened in the budget. Some of the main things, you're aware of the basics of what's happened already. So there's a few subjects I'm going to talk about, because before the budget, Labour said that, well, they'd said in their manifesto before they got elected just a few months ago, that they wouldn't increase national insurance, income tax, VAT and corporation tax. And the main people they were looking to protect were working people, whatever that may mean. It appears to mean that people that need to work to generate an income, not people that have built wealth and can live off their investments, which is interesting because only half the actual UK population actually goes to work. Which I find quite curious. Anyway, so that big part said they wouldn't attack those particular taxes. All it left really for them to focus on are capital taxes like inheritance, capital gains tax, stamp duty, left that wide open, pensions. These are all the areas that they could concentrate on. And that's pretty much what happened here. So when it comes to inheritance tax, there wasn't many major changes other than the allowances, like the nil rate band, which has been frozen for years already. They're going to freeze that for 2 further years. That'll make 7 years in total, I think, since the last time they decided to freeze these allowances. So your basic rate tax band and your residence band. There's been changes, actually there's been something else that affects inheritance tax, changes to a couple of inheritance tax reliefs known as business relief and agricultural relief. Now what these do, they give you 100% exemption against inheritance tax when you die if you own a farm or agricultural land. It enables you to pass the farm, the land down to the next generation, so they don't have to sell the farm. It means the farm can stay in the family for generation after generation. But now agricultural relief has been reformed so that apart from the first £1 million, beyond £1 million value, when the farmer dies, inheritance tax will apply to 50%. Now, where I live in Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire, you're not going to get many farms that are only worth £1 million. They're all going to be worth far more than that. which means there's going to be huge bills to pay when a farmer dies. And sadly, those farms are going to have to be sold, I think, in many cases, and not inherited by the next generation, which is a pity because this has been going on for many, many years. We've been passed down the generations. That's going to end. And it's pretty much the same thing with business as well. If you own a trading business for more than 2 years, it used to be free of inheritance tax, 100% relief called business relief. The same pretty much rules are going to apply for businesses. So you run a business, you don't sell it before you die. Only the first £1 million would be free of inheritance tax. And beyond that, it'll be subject to 50% inheritance tax. In other words, so again, that's not a good thing. You can't pass businesses down the generations either. I don't think it's a good policy, personally. Very disruptive. And ultimately, the people who will be the worst off here will be the employees, because that business won't be able to just continue. And it may just have to be closed down. So that's a shame. So there's that. Been an announcement that Labour want to bring pensions into the inheritance tax charge, but that would take quite a long time to achieve, if it's achievable at all, because it means a massive change to legislation that would come in 2027, if at all. So we'll come on to that in a moment when we talk about pensions. Capital gains tax, there's been increases in capital gains tax from 10 and 20%, which is the rates for lower rate taxpayers and higher rate taxpayers, 10% for basic rate taxpayers, 20% for higher rate taxpayers. That's been increased to 18% and 24% respectively. That's the main change there. The taxation on property gains, residential property, still remains at 2 rates, 18% for basic rate taxpayers and 24% for higher rate taxpayers. Also, something that's hit property owners who are investors, who've got 2 or more properties, the stamp duty you pay on buying a second home, or third or fourth, etc., has gone up from 3% to 5%. Quite a swinging tax increase, I feel. So that continues the attack on buy-to-let owners that have come under a plethora of tax increases, withdrawals of tax reliefs, and extra burdensome legislation for years now. I think it's a pity because the government relies on private landlords to provide 50% of the housing stock in the UK. And to me, it feels like you're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Why on earth would you want to penalise the private sector, which provides 50% of all properties for people to rent? Because all this is going to do is reduce the housing stock, because lots of landlords are selling their properties now and they won't go to first-time buyers because many first-time buyers just can't afford it. It'll go to other existing homeowners. So I think that's a shame. It will only result in one thing, and that will result in rents going up even further and becoming even more unaffordable. So I don't think that's a very good move myself. Businesses have been attacked again with yet another increase in employers' national insurance, which has now gone up from 13.8% to 15%. Now, I consider this a tax on jobs because employers' national insurance gives nothing to employees or employers in terms of benefit. It can only be described as a tax on jobs because national insurance is a tax. And the threshold on which national insurance applies has been reduced as well, down to 5,000. So that's not a good move. If you add that to the 3% compulsory workplace pension contribution by employers, that means a sum total of 18%. I think this can only lead to more unemployment because employers will increasingly decide to employ self-employed people on a freelance basis. They will use VAs from abroad who are much cheaper, particularly from lesser developed countries where the wage rate is much lower and no PAYEs apply because they're self-employed. But it'll also lead to a massive increase in artificial intelligence because if you use AI fully, you can really reduce the amount of people you need to employ significantly because AI is like employing people. It's like employing more than one person. If you use it a lot, it can be the equivalent of employing as many as 10 people. So I think employers will increasingly be forced to go down these routes of using more automation and lower wage costs because it's very expensive to employ people now. So again, I think that's not a good move. It's definitely not a move that will increase wealth and increase opportunities and jobs in the UK. Now, pensions, there was no major change. There was a fear that the Labour government could reduce the tax-free lump sum from around about 265,000 down to as little as £100,000 in its budget. That wasn't announced, but what they did say was that by April 2027 they want to bring pensions into the scope of inheritance tax. Well, the amount of money invested in private sector pensions in the UK is absolutely enormous, probably runs to the trillions. So that really was a soft target. The trouble is it will involve Labour totally rewriting huge amounts of legislation, because pensions have always been in trust. They've always been there. And trust law goes back literally hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. So it would mean a major upheaval in law. I'm not personally convinced it's even achievable. It's such a big upheaval. And again, it just seems to be a penalty on people that have been wise enough to invest money in pensions. But in my experience, most people don't invest in pensions to save inheritance tax. Most people invest in pensions to give themselves a retirement income. It's just a bonus that they're not subject to inheritance tax, I would say, and gives you the ability to pass on your wealth down the generations without a tax charge. I think that's quite fair to do, because let's face it, when you pay into investments and pensions, it's after your post-tax income. So it doesn't seem fair to you yet again, or pensions, when it's joined the pension scheme, you didn't know it was going to be subject to inheritance tax. So I don't think that's a good move either. The Labour Party has decided to continue with the Conservatives' idea of this new rule covering non-domiciled people. So wealthy non-domiciled individuals living in the UK have had the benefit of lower taxation on their income, because up to now they've not paid tax on income earned from overseas unless they remit it to the UK. There's going to be a new system where these non-domiciled wealthy individuals will pay a lot more tax than in the past. Again, it seems not a good idea, because although in theory you could raise more tax from these individuals, what you're going to do is just deter them even coming to the UK in the first place, and also encourage them to leave the UK before these new rules come into place. So although these wealthy individuals are paying less tax proportionately than other people in the UK, what's being forgotten here is they create enormous wealth in the UK, because they create businesses, which creates jobs, spend a lot of their money in the UK. All that's going to go, because they'll just not bother coming to the UK. Why would you come to a high tax country? You might as well go somewhere else where they're more friendly towards you. So unfortunately, the sum of all these measures that's meant to raise £40 billion in tax, I think won't work. I think if anything, tax revenue might go up a little bit in the short term, but they won't increase tax revenue overall, because there is a perverse rule in taxation that the higher you increase your taxes, the less tax revenue you bring in, because it deters people from either staying in the country and paying the taxes, or even creating wealth and incomes that are subject to higher rates of tax. They'll try harder and harder to not pay the taxes. Whereas if you have a lower tax regime, perversely, governments collect more taxes, because people stay in the country, they don't emigrate, and also they don't mind paying smaller taxes. But when you pay taxes, it's just a big deterrent. I mean, already it's possible for British expat to emigrate from the UK to Dubai and pay no taxes. On top of that, you've got fantastically warm weather and a government that encourages businesses. I mean, what would you do in that situation? Now, I've looked at some statistics on this, and in the last year, 9.5 million millionaires have emigrated from the UK. That's the second most in the world. Only China's had more emigrants, but then that's a much bigger country, 20 times the population of the UK. And what's the number one country of choice to emigrate to? United Arab Emirates, which must mean mostly people moving to Dubai, which is probably the most favourite Emirate destination of choice. So unfortunately, I think the government's got that wrong as well, because it's just not going to help create prosperity. It's just going to create more poverty, in my opinion. So I don't think that's a clever idea. So for those of you who've decided to stay in the UK, there are still things you can do. For example, when it comes to, say, inheritance tax, you've got more inheritance tax to pay now if you run a business or have a farm. I think there's going to be more schemes created, particularly insurance-based trust schemes that will help you reduce your inheritance tax charge. I think they'll be a lot more popular type of things to do. I mentioned businesses overcoming these increases in national insurance, the tax on jobs. I've already mentioned that they would find it easier to find alternative ways of getting cheaper labour, or including AI. When it comes to pensions, if they do come into the scope of inheritance tax, I can see more people taking tax-free lump sums out and then reinvesting that amount to other inheritance tax efficient schemes. And there are many out there, although some of them are relatively high risk, shall we say, from an investment point of view. So it won't be popular for everybody, but they can be extremely tax efficient still. Now, for those of you who are so put off by this, you might be part of this 9.5 million who've already emigrated, of millionaires. You may decide just to emigrate. And if that is once you've emigrated, you can avoid legally capital taxes in the UK, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, but you have to literally move and sever all connections with the UK for good. This is quite a big decision to make, but I suspect a lot of people will do that. There's already a lot of people doing it and have already done it, and there'll be more and more people wanting to do it going forward, particularly wealthy people, for the reasons already given. So there are things you can do, whether you stay in the UK or emigrate. But what I would say is, if you are deciding to emigrate, bear in mind, one of the fears about the last budget before it was announced was that Labour could impose a capital gains tax charge on all of your assets when you emigrate away from the UK. Now, that is very penal in my book. So if you are considering emigrating, I would go now. I wouldn't delay, because why delay and subject yourself to potentially a very, very high tax rate? I can't really see things changing for the next few years. Only time will tell. But I hope you found some of these tips useful for your forward planning, and I wish you best success in the future of minimising your taxes following this budget. Take care. Have a great day.